Ibrahim Raisi has won Friday's presidential election by a landslide.
همچنان که پیش بینی میشد ابراهیم رئیسی در انتخابات ریاست جمهوری ایران برنده شد.
Four judges who oversaw executions of thousands of political prisoners in 1988.
Rather, a stage-managed process that virtually guaranteed he'd win.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post, where we dig into the coverage and look at how news is reported. Here are the media stories we're examining this week. Iran's new president-elect is heading into the job carrying some baggage from the past that neither he nor the country's state-friendly news outlets care to talk about. The Castro era is over in Cuba. The country's new leaders are being challenged on the issue of freedom of expression. In Egypt, 2 more women are jailed over their TikTok videos. The targeting of female social media influencers continues. And the inside story on life after lockdown.
Oh, I wish I could.
For those of us who just aren't ready for a return to the outside world. Iran has a new president coming into office after an election that had all the trappings of the democratic process, campaign rallies, televised debates, minus the free and fair part. Ibrahim Raisi's victory was never in doubt. It was guaranteed after the government banned any candidate with a chance of beating him from running. That's why voter turnout was so low. Adding to Raisi's legitimacy issues are persistent questions about his role in the mass execution of political prisoners in the 1980s, involvement that he denies and is rarely publicly questioned about, since discussing the repression of the 80s is a no-go zone for Iranian journalists. Raisi's win, however tainted, represents a victory for the old guard and his mentor, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And Raisi's background as a judge, his past record on cases pertaining to the internet, and what Iranians are allowed to do online do not bode well for the future of freedom of expression there. Our starting point this week is Tehran. On the final day of the Iranian election campaign, there was the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, on national television, urging citizens to vote. Not for him. Khamenei's name was not on the ballot. His is a job for life. He was talking about the presidential election. He failed to convince because Iranians knew better. They had watched as opposition candidates, one after another, were disqualified from running by government officials, effectively clearing the path to the president's office for Khamenei's choice, Ibrahim Raisi. In the end, voter turnout was drastically low, around 48%. Take the spoiled ballots out of it, and it was more like 41%. It turns out that voters in the Islamic Republic do not like it when election outcomes are preordained.
There is an incredible mobile phone recording of a gentleman in Iran, and it was amazing because he just said, and I think that's kind of all you need to know. I think it's a great kind of motif for how the elections actually run in Iran.
This is a democracy, but it's not perfect. I think we should try to be less sensitive about the low turnout in Iran, because this happens not just in Iran. There are some reformist supporters that didn't see their candidates run for presidency. That's why they didn't show up to vote.
Everything that was set up, from the selection of the candidates that could be voted on to the selection of Raisi as basically an uncontested front runner, has given this feeling that this is very much a preordained plan. Many are interpreting this as Raisi being prepped to succeed Ayatollah Khamenei.
Since 2019, Ibrahim Raisi has been in charge of Iran's judiciary. He rose through the legal ranks in the 1980s, the early years of the Islamic Republic, when it was also at war with Iraq. It was a time of suspicion and violence, when political opponents disappeared, executed in their thousands. This week, Amnesty International was among the human rights organizations calling for Iran's next president to be investigated for crimes against humanity, for his involvement in what some Iranians call the Bloody Decade.
1980s were very harrowing times in Iran. You could be going to jail for owning a VCR, for wearing a t-shirt, for using foreign words that were considered suspect. Political opponents were executed in large numbers. The then Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini gave an order that basically said, kill as many political prisoners as you can, as quickly as you can. Now, 4 people were on a death panel that decided to execute this effectively. Ebrahim Raisi was one of them.
The bloody decade of Iranian history, certainly in contemporary history, is considered to be a public secret. And the 1980s was the inception period of the Islamic Republic. This was a time where they were building a narrative of credibility, of authenticity. And this branding effort depends on the 1980s being told in a certain way.
When I was a kid, you couldn't really talk about it. In the years since, because of the spread of blogs and internet and a lot of victims coming out of Iran and being able to speak about it publicly, there is more information about it and more people know.
It took Iranians almost 30 years before some of the truth came out. In 2016, an audio tape recorded in 1988 was broadcast by Radio Zamaneh, a Persian language station based in Amsterdam. On it, one of the leaders of the revolution, Ayatollah Hossein Ali Montazeri, confronts Raisi over the part he played in the mass executions. Montazeri later resigned, but the tape was released by his son, who was then prosecuted under Ebrahim Raisi's watch. Raisi has, at times, either denied his role in the executions or argued that they were justified, under a religious ruling issued by former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini. The president-elect clearly wants that story left behind, and can usually count on the Iranian media to cooperate. But 2 days after the election, Raisi was questioned on his past at a news conference attended by the international media.
On the day you were elected, Amnesty International said you should be investigated for crimes against humanity. Do you think that these issues will be difficult for you when you interact with world leaders?
Raisi's response to that question was very telling.
تمام اقداماتی که من در این مدت مسئولیت انجام دادم همواره در جهت دفاع از حقوق بشر و حقوق انسان بوده.
He actually tried to paint his role during that event as commendable because he was doing the good work of protecting the Islamic Republic of Iran. And this is a narrative created around the 1988 massacres, which was they were getting rid of terrorists. So it is a very frightening prospect to see that he would kind of whitewash these crimes against humanity in that way. And it beckons you to think that with someone like him at the helm, there are going to be some very dark forms of repression in Iran.
The real power in Tehran lies not in the president's office, but with the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and the clerics surrounding him. The president's role includes representing Iran in its dealings with foreign governments, including those currently imposing sanctions on the country over its nuclear program. Raisi succeeds Hassan Rouhani in the job. Rouhani was considered a moderate, but his 8 years in office did nothing for news organizations and their freedoms. Conservative factions loyal to Iran's leadership control the majority of influential media outlets, from state television to key news agencies. There's always been space for reformist newspapers challenging authority, but only up to a point. Editors from some of those papers met with Raisi prior to the election. No one has reported what was said, but their critical coverage of the candidate suddenly softened thereafter.
Under Raisi, my own prediction is that we won't see further restrictions on the press. Iran is already one of the last 10 in most global indexes, so it's harder to really go lower than this. But I don't think he's looking for a fight, obviously. He knows he's been elected in very dubious circumstances. And the economy is key here, because right now the economic deprivations in Iran mean that very few people are interested in political dissent as much as just trying to make ends meet.
I have worked with the state-owned media outlets for the past 20 years or so. The government doesn't have any final say or control over the media in Iran. The only thing that the government can control is Iran Daily newspaper in both English and Persian, but that is really it. We saw how the current government failed to control the media. I don't think that Mr. Raisi is going to do that.
Raisi, given the fact that he was just in the position of head of judiciary from 2019 to present, he has also been responsible and has contributed to the deterioration of internet freedom. We also saw that his judiciary signed off on an order to censor a slew of different foreign messengers, the banning of Signal, the encrypted messenger, for example. There has been a policy to implement a tiered system of access towards the internet, different kinds of access depending on your profession. And it's very much expected that under Raisi's Ministry of Information, Communication and Technology, this policy is very much so expected to be put into place.
A president-elect who has already shown a penchant for curtailing expression online. A new face of the old guard, part of whose past remains journalistically off-limits. A hardliner who all the signs and photo ops suggest is on his way to being the next supreme leader. The election result in Iran was never in doubt. The prospect and future of free speech in the Islamic Republic very much is. In Egypt, 2 young women with sizable followings on Instagram and TikTok have been convicted of human trafficking. Meenakshi Ravi is here with the details. Meena, these are serious charges considering these women have been posting short videos online.
They are indeed, Richard. Hanin Hossam, who is 20 years old and has more than 900,000 followers on TikTok, has been sentenced to 10 years in prison. Her co-defendant, Mawada Al-Adam, who is 23 and has more than 1 million followers, has been sentenced to 6 years. Both women have been accused of, quote, using girls in acts contrary to the principles and values of Egyptian society with the aim of gaining material benefits, which, according to the authorities, counts as human trafficking. This is not the first time the state has come after these 2 women. Hossam, who is a student at the University of Cairo, was first arrested last year for violating family values after she posted a video telling her female followers that they could use Likey, another video content creation platform, and make money. The authorities said that she was encouraging women to sell sex online. Mawada Al-Adam was arrested for the same offense a month later after she posted videos of herself dancing and lip-syncing to popular music. Both the women were sentenced to jail time and fined, but their convictions were overturned and they were released earlier this year. But the authorities were clearly not done with them.
There's a larger pattern at play here. Egyptians, women, being arrested for what they're posting online.
Yes, ever since 2018, when a new cybercrime law was passed, numerous women have been arrested on vague charges of violating public morals. Egypt's Prosecutor General justifies it by saying forces of evil were abusing the new virtual electronic space.
We're talking about influencers. What about journalists and the policing of their social media activities in Egypt?
They're still under the gun. Just 2 months ago, 2 freelance journalists, Salafa Magdi and her husband Hossam Al-Sayed, were released after 17 months in pre-trial detention for allegedly disseminating false news and misusing their social media accounts.
Pre-trial detention. In Egypt, that can mean anything. Journalists have spent years in jail and never even got to trial.
Absolutely, as we at Jazeera know only too well.
Thanks, Meena. 2 months ago, when Raul Castro gave up the leadership of Cuba's Communist Party, it marked the first time in more than 6 decades the country has not had a Castro in charge. His successor, Miguel Díaz-Canel, inherited some familiar challenges: a struggling economy, sanctions imposed by the United States, as well as a pandemic. He's also dealing with growing demands for greater freedom of expression. In Cuba, political demonstrations are rare. Yet towards the end of the Castro era, as access to the internet improved, that began to change. The protesters are diverse. They range from artists and other intellectuals who support the revolution to more radical activists like the San Isidro movement. It's demanding fundamental changes, and its methods, from hunger strikes to viral videos, are attracting the attention of authorities who have traditionally treated dissent with a heavy hand. The Listening Post's Daniel Toure now on the struggle over freedom of expression in post-Castro Cuba.
It's the twilight of the Castro era, and an unusual message is spreading through Cuba's online community, a full-throated defiance of the Communist Party. It's February, and a group of rappers, dissidents, have released a protest song on YouTube. Patria y Vida, or Homeland and Life, takes aim at Fidel Castro's revolutionary slogan, Homeland or Death. With views in the millions, the track's success caught the government off guard. 2 months later, police descended on Havana's impoverished San Isidro neighborhood to arrest one of the rappers, Michael Osorbo Castillo. But when they tried to take him into custody, they got another surprise.
The police were going to arrest him, and the neighborhood came out in his defense. Michael managed to break the handcuffs and raise his fist in the air. It was an amazing event because it was the creation of a new symbol.
Amaury Pacheco, like Michael Osorbo, is part of the San Isidro movement, a collective of artists demanding greater freedom of expression. The group got its start in 2018 after the government passed a law, Decree 349, that prohibits artists from working either in public or in private without obtaining permission from the Ministry of Culture.
That was when we set up our group as a way of protecting culture from these attacks and to address artists' rights and human rights. We founded a space that would allow us to connect art with activism and politics.
Since 2018, we've seen the introduction of several new laws that curtail freedom of expression. Penalties for people that dissent include arrest, house arrest. You can also have your internet cut. These have become standard police measures. There's been a hardening of the state's repression, and we're now seeing a struggle between the forces of hegemony and those of autonomy.
The San Isidro artists are not the only Cubans calling for more freedom of speech. Last November, hundreds came together in protest outside the Ministry of Culture. In most countries, that would barely qualify as a news story. But this is Cuba. Since the Fidel Castro-led revolution in 1959, the island has been ruled as a one-party state, with few political or cultural freedoms. 5 years before coming to power, Castro saw the role that the US and a CIA-backed radio station played in overthrowing the democratically elected left-wing government of Guatemala. After Cuba's revolution, Castro became the latest target of Washington's anti-communist crusade. And having seen how the media could be weaponized, he took no chances on freedom of expression. Castro nationalized all privately owned news outlets, and over the following decades, thousands of Cubans were jailed for dissent, with continued US aggression providing the pretext. Things have loosened up a little since 2011, when Raúl Castro succeeded his brother Fidel. The government is more receptive to pressure from below. And faced with the protesters outside his window last November, the Deputy Minister of Culture, Fernando Rojas, invited them in to discuss their concerns.
Among the things we agreed was to open up a channel of communication between the so-called independent art spaces and official cultural institutions. We also agreed not to harass independent art spaces and to continue holding meetings with artists. We aim to keep up the spirit of dialogue and maintain this relationship.
This was really significant. Seeing all those artists protesting outside really shook the culture ministry to its core. The protesters ended up splitting into two groups. One group has been in dialogue with the ministry about potential reforms. Then there's a more overtly political group, which includes the San Isidro artists, some of whom have a political agenda involving regime change.
The government has accused San Isidro members of receiving support from the US, which spends around $20 million a year on so-called democracy promotion, efforts seen by Havana as a push for regime change.
Yo creo que no es lo mismo una persona que opina.
I don't think demonstrating peacefully to express an opinion is the same thing as receiving logistical support from the US Embassy or verbal support from US institutions. Those people who are acting against the constitutional order of Cuba with US backing deserve to be prosecuted in the same way as if it was an attack, whether terrorist or otherwise, against our independence.
Una agresión a nuestra independencia.
El ciudadano Luis Manuel Otero Cántara.
Since last October, the San Isidro movement's leader, Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, has either been in jail, under house arrest, or confined to a hospital, and security forces have disrupted several attempted hunger strikes.
Sí, saludos. Buenas noches.
Then there's the other weapon in the government's arsenal, state media.
Ahora anuncia a todas voces que inició una nueva huelga de hambre. Recuerden que ya hizo algo parecido en noviembre, la llamada farsa de San Isidro.
Descrédito en la televisión.
They discredit you on TV, and there is no way of refuting any of the accusations. We call it public assassination. Maybe beheadings and firing squads happen in other countries, but here they'll subject you to treatment that leaves you like a dead man walking.
Eres como un hombre muerto caminando, ¿no?
You cannot express yourself. If you do, they'll try to get to you through your family and break down your relationships.
Tu relación y tus vínculos familiares.
El tema es que
The thing is that it isn't just the Cuban government telling you that Alcántara gets his orders from abroad. It's the actual recording of a conversation between Alcántara and somebody who's receiving US money.
Yo te doy idea, contexto, nada, yo te dirijo.
Yo te dirijo.
And no one has tried to deny these allegations. No one has stepped up to say, this is false.
nadie ha dicho esto es falso.
He visto a los medios estatales mentir.
I've seen the state media lie. For instance, I've seen Ghanbar newspapers say that groups protesting violence against women are financed by the CIA and are mercenaries.
Y es mentira.
That's a lie. So why should I believe any of the other things they say?
Cubans now have other sources of information at their fingertips. The internet arrived on the island in 2013, but the biggest change came 5 years later, with 3G smartphones. As a result, alternative news websites are getting more clicks, while social media platforms provide an outlet for dissent. It was Miguel Díaz-Canel, Raúl Castro's former deputy, and now his successor, who oversaw the launching of mobile internet. Now the limits on freedom of expression in Cuba are being tested like never before.
Cuando tú tienes acceso a internet.
Once people have access to the internet, censorship becomes futile. There was a system in place, very similar to the one in the Soviet Union, and they are trying to keep it going, to keep the media under control, as if the internet is something that can be controlled. They still haven't understood that their monopoly is over.
Que el monopolio se acabó.
And finally, in the immortal words of The Clash, should I stay or should I go? Out that is. Having been locked down for so long, many of us have grown a little too comfortable on our own. Plus, let's face it, our communication and social skills have taken a serious hit. We've been wearing sweatpants, tracksuit bottoms, and leggings for so long that jeans suddenly feel like formal wear. And the thought of returning to the office, trading Zoom calls for FaceTime that's actual FaceTime, feels like too much, too soon. These next two videos by content creators Haley Morris and Laura Whaley capture the personal turmoil a lot of people are going through over the prospect of life post-lockdown. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
Why are you dressed like that?
We're going out.
Sorry, what?
I said we're going out.
No, we bloody aren't.
We're not doing this.
Oh, good. So we are staying here.
No, this. We're not doing this. We are definitely going out.
Well, where the hell are we going?
To meet our friends.
Absolutely not.
We've been in lockdown for months.
But people.
What about people?
There's so many of them out there.
Yep, obviously we do live on Earth.
No, this is too much.
No, it isn't.
It's too soon.
I'm sorry, but we're going out.
No, I'm staying here.
No, we're leaving.
Fine. Well, don't blame me when we run out of things to talk about.
You're exactly who I'm going to blame.
The office is reopened. No. How are we feeling? Fantastic. Not to be dramatic, I will quit. On my way. Oh, I wish I could. Just let me know. I haven't been vaccinated. Anyone else? I don't have any office clothes. I also don't have the ability to control my facial expression. Kim, what are your thoughts? Kim? No, thank you.